extracting square roots is actually something that you typically don't come upon a problem and it says, hey, extract the square roots. But it's something that you need to use in other problems. So here we're going to look at two different examples. They're going to be pretty basic, but it's the same idea, and you should be able to get to this point at least. And so the idea about extracting square roots is you're trying to solve for x, and wherever x is, you're going to look at that, and it's probably going to be inside a square. Now in this one, the x alone is being squared. So the first thing we want to do is get the x squared by itself. I have to get rid of the 6. So I'm going to divide both sides by 6. Now as I divide by 6, I see that 42 is divisible by 6, I get 7. Sometimes it doesn't happen that you get a nice even number. Sometimes you get a fraction, and that's just the way it happens, especially as you get higher up in the maths. Okay, so here we have x squared equals 7. And I'm not done because I want to know what x equals. So in order to figure out what x equals, I have to undo the squared, which is square rooting. So I'm going to square root both sides. Now as I square root something squared, the square root and the squared cancel, and I just get x. The other thing that's going to be special here is, remember, just like we learned in Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, when you bring in the square root, you need a plus or minus because your answer could be positive or negative. Because remember, when you square something, it gets rid of any negatives that might have been there. And then we're left with the square root of 7 because I don't know the square root of 7 and I can't simplify the square root of 7. This would be my answer. Sometimes you can simplify the square root of 7. Sometimes you can actually just square root it and be done. But in this case, 7 is prime. There's nothing I can do with it. Now the next problem is going to be a little bit more complicated. So the next problem, we're still trying to solve for x, but you'll notice that x is in a bubble. And this bubble is being squared. And so a lot of times people are tempted to take that squared and multiply through, and that's never okay. Because if you ever have a bubble squared, you have to box it out. So that's not going to be the case. What I want to do is right away, since it's just this being squared by itself, there's no numbers out here, and if there were numbers out here, I would get rid of them and bring them over here. But since it's just this being squared, it's time to get rid of the square root just right off the bat. Or sorry, get rid of the squared right off the bat. So I'm going to square root both sides just right away. Now what happens then is the square root and the squared cancel. And so I just have x plus 4. And just like before, when you bring in the square root, you have to do a plus or minus then. And so I got the square root plus or minus the square root of 10. And then my squared is gone now on the left side, so the left side now I just have x plus 4. So I can go ahead and solve for x. I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And this a lot of times is what gets people confused and frustrated and worried, because what they see is that I'm supposed to subtract 4 from this, and this is a square root, and I've got a plus or minus, and we just kind of go crazy going, what do I do? What do I do? But it's not that bad, because it's all you have to do is say, you know what? I'm just going to write down what I have. I have a minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 10. Now you might be tempted to write plus or minus the square root of 10 minus 4, which actually is technically right, but typically we like to write the square roots at the end, plus or minus in between if we can. So this would be the way I would appreciate seeing it, but if you do it this way, I'll count that as right also. And then that's basically it. Now you could take a calculator and find out the decimal and go ahead and add it and subtract it, but it's not really necessary at this point. This is good enough for an answer for me. So extracting square roots is just getting what's being squared, whether it's just an x or it's a bubble, get that by itself, and then square root both sides. Just remember, when you square root both sides, you have to have a plus or minus, and go ahead and solve for x, however that has to happen. And that's it.